Okay, my name's Alistair Arthur, and our topic would be on a debate about GMOs and GMS, which are respectively genetically modified organisms and genetically modified foods. While these topics have the same ethical background and the same topics that charge it to make it a very controversial topic in the science field today, there are two very polar sides to it: a pro-GMO GMF and anti-GMO GMF. In this article, in this video segment, I will explain why I am a pro-GMF GMO sympathizer. So, to provide some background, genetically modified organisms, they have tweaks at a molecular level and have been applied rigorously in contemporary agriculture since 1996. They've been known to make crops more nutrient dense, make animals and plants disease resistant. They've been known to increase crop yields and thrive in marginal conditions. And over the past 2 decades since their application in 1996 to 2016, lines have been clearly drawn about whether or not animal welfare and crop productivity are really yielding their advertised amounts, and their effects that they have on humans in development and embryos. And there's a whole controversy around their application and their effects on human health, environmental pollution, agricultural economy, and as mentioned before, animal welfare. So we're just going to go over these 4 general topics and have a quick dialogue about it to put both of our articles in context.
Hello, I am Babatunde Abusalam, and I will also be working on the topic of GMOs and GMFs with Alistair. As he's already presented the topic, given most of the details, I'm just going to go ahead and say that I will be representing the side of those who are mostly against, or who have strong complaints against GMOs and GMFs. I think that I can really relate to this topic because I grew up in an environment where there are practically no GMOs and GMFs applied. So I can easily relate to some of the arguments, and also I will be coming from a scientific point of view based on studies and research, and a lot of these point towards the fact that GMOs can be categorized as dangerous, unsafe to the human bodies, to the environment, and mostly and overall it can be considered an ethical, like he said, it's an ethical topic, but it goes into a natural realm. So I guess we'll be exploring different aspects of this debate, and like he's already mentioned most of the different topics: animal welfare, legal issues. We'll be discussing also the pollution and safety, basically human health.
Okay, so the first talking point we're going to bring up in this dialogue is going to be about human health. What GMOs can offer consumers is a more nutrient-dense food, ability to not only increase yields of the crops, but have them travel farther if you're going to send them to other states in the U.S. or other countries, in fact. Better preserve them so that they can get to their final destination, to the consumers, in one piece. More nutritionally dense, like the whole 9 yards. And throughout history, from the application of GM in 96, there's been plenty of places or events where this application of GM has been proven to help. For example, the poster child for GM supporting human health would probably be golden rice, which has been known to cure blindness because of and help fight a vitamin A nutritional deficiency across the third world and in most Asian and African countries, restoring sight and curing disease, essentially, diseases that would otherwise be prevented. Yeah. So that's just a general glimpse of like how GM can help add nutrition, how help human health, and not cause problems to human health. Ballas?
Okay, well, I'd like to answer that with the fact that, okay, basically when we're talking about GMs and just food and just the safety department, I would have to say that I would not agree with the fact that they're 100% safe for the human body, just as healthy as organic, because there have been research that proves that they do cause a certain level of harm to the human body. They have caused an increase in the, let's say, the dietary what's it called again? Sanity.
Okay.
Dang, I used a French word.
Sanity?
Dang it. I'm sorry. I have a tendency to go French.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
The level of health, the basic level of human health, like since the introduction of GMO foods has decreased overall. We've noticed a increase in the level of allergies that have been popping up,
okay.
around, specifically around the U.S. and the claims that GMOs have increased the yields throughout the world and all that stuff, and that basically has no scientific proof that it increases the yield. And the problem in these circumstances would be mostly a problem of food distribution. It has nothing to do with the amount of food that is being produced, since organically and naturally produced foods actually have been stated to have greater yields. Also, you mentioned the fact that golden rice has been somewhat of a saving grace for some Asian and African countries. Well, I will not dispute the fact that the golden rice has been actually known to help cure eye diseases and stuff like that, mostly in Asian countries. However, I would not go so far, because golden rice, while golden rice may be one of the very few what's it called again?
Poster childs.
Yeah, poster childs of GMOs. You cannot take that one example and categorize the entire brand with it.
Okay. So to respond to that, crop yields per se, modifications, refuting that they necessarily reduce crop yields entirely isn't necessarily. I would fundamentally disagree with that. For example, if you're going to try to plant seeds in drought-ridden areas or desolate areas that are like soil lacks nutrients, not enough rainfall, areas where they wouldn't have high enough yields to begin with,
yes,
GM crops, genetically modified crops, can be introduced into these areas and actually improve yields intrinsically that way, rather than taking contemporary already yielding farms and amplifying their yields there. Well, there's studies out there that I'm sure could agree with either my stance or yours. I don't have that information at hand right now. What was the next point you brought
actually up? I was gonna say about what you just said. I agree that in certain areas it can allow you to increase the yields and introduce crops that were previously impossible. Although you have to understand that in certain areas where those crops weren't actually where we couldn't cultivate certain crops before, you have to understand that there must have been some sort of ecological or environmental reason why they could not have been cultivated. So introducing these new species or these new cultivations in that environment could have potentially very detrimental effects, especially when you're cultivating.
So invasive species concept, right. And I mean, as a scientist, I do not disagree with the evidence that invasive species have the potential to be detrimental to an environment. But we're talking about taking a native crop in that area, like rice, for example, which is eaten by half of the world, aka like all of Asia and predominantly Africa, at the same time, taking that and modifying the strain so that you can not only increase the nutritional benefits that are found inside them and refortify them, but also improve yields at the same time, right? These two things together, pretty much are what can answer, our hunger epidemic in the world. Hunger is experienced by over 10% of the world population, right? And that was in a recent study or a recent survey outputted by the United Nations agricultural organization, Food and Agricultural Organization, they said that 795 million people are chronically undernourished, and
Yes.
ways that this could be answered could be GM like staples like GM rice, right? Like other ways, there's other ways out there, but like all this opposition that has been like those NGOs have been saying about GMO foods is that like, oh no, there's so much fear around it. There's so much like like the idea is that like applying these could be detrimental to the host populations. Well, there's examples of goats being genetically modified to have their milk reinforced with enzymes that help cure diarrheal diseases, applied in regions across Africa and Asia where diarrhea kills over 1.8 million children, can actually save 1.8 million lives and fortify and round out the diets. Like I'm moving away from like the first world look here. Like, don't look at just the first world. Don't look at like how can we as like people who go to bed with full stomachs every night, like fathom the idea of polluting our diet with genetically modified organisms, right? When we have other people across the seas who don't even have full stomachs, right? We could solve the almost 800 million people crisis, the food epidemic overseas, with the good application of GM here.
Okay, then that would most definitely be. I agree 100%. That would be a very good thing. Introducing those type of foods into the environment, into those different countries to help their to improve the nutritional system would be in fact a very good thing. If not for the fact that when introducing these specific GMOs or these GMFs, it's a very complicated process. Like as it's been noted many times, a lot of countries around the world have banned genetically modified foods, and some of them have very high levels of restrictions on them. Reason for that is that there's just not enough information that's being provided.
Information, how so?
When it comes to again, it comes back to a safety issue. For example, when in the U.S., one of the main issues is the FDA labeling of GMO foods, and that's in place because the FDA does not have per se any mandatory way to analyze and determine the safety factors of the GM foods. Mostly it's left up to the companies themselves that make these foods to provide a safety resume and all that stuff for these specific genetically modified crops. And when you add to that the fact that there have been multiple individual studies that prove that many of the genetically modified foods that have already been introduced into our diet system, into our society, do actually present some very dangerous and potentially deadly side effects. So if we take that into account, we could not possibly agree to introduce these GM foods into a different population, possibly maybe solving one crisis but introducing an entirely new one.
So starting at the beginning of your segment of the dialogue there, you started off with GM regulation.
Yes.
Okay. GM regulation, through research I've done in my article, has been actually proven to be like one of the most regulated food sources in the industry, in the overall contemporary agricultural industry.
Yeah.
While the government has a certain level of oversight, not all necessarily genetic foods need to undergo the same rigorous scrutiny that pretty much all the genetic foods are the same. Mm-hmm. The ones that have all these harmful chemicals in them those are the ones that should be under the same scrutiny, but ones that provide other nutritional benefits, or the ones that for example, the ones that produce their own pesticide or herbicide, mm-hmm. Yes, those are the ones that we should be checking. Other ones don't need to undergo that scrutiny, which is what you were saying. Not every one of these crops is being checked at the same level. Yeah, and the information that I found suggests that it's being checked at their own severity per se, mm-hmm. per what that genetic modification.
So depending on what modification has been applied, there's a different series of tests.
Yes, exactly, and that's how I believe it should be. The other, what was the other one you mentioned? You mentioned about health,
mm-hmm.
just about okay. So what I found in my research about pros and cons about GM related health is that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, they found that they cite animal studies showing organ damage, gastrointestinal and immune system disorders related to accelerated aging, infertility, and they infer that this causes by feeding our animals this stuff, it causes these diseases, and because this food can cause diseases in these animals, that this can also be reciprocated to the current rise in chronic illnesses seen across the Americas and the first world countries that apply rigorously GM foods into their crops. And I just don't agree with that, because there's other studies that suggest, for example, Van Eeman's trillion meal food study that we discussed before this video.
Yeah.
There's a recent food study published out there that has gone literally, it was started before, it's a 29-year long survey, and it started before the application of GM in agriculture in '96. And it goes up to 2015, 2016, over 29 years. And it studied the effects of pure organic crops being fed to our agriculture, our livestock, and then it compared that to the change into GM. And over 29 years, over 1 trillion meals, they have found, I quote, they have found no, hold up, let me find this quote. They produced results that have consistently revealed that the performance and health of GE-fed animals were compared to those fed near non-GE lines and commercial varieties. Translating that, it pretty much says that there is no relation, there's no relation to genetically modified foods having this relation to all these gastrointestinal impacts to the digestive systems of animals, as strongly cited by the opposition to GM, and therefore the linking that to chronic illnesses just simply is it just doesn't make sense. So I mean, studies like these, there's other reviews, there's literary reviews of over 30 to 40 GM related articles that refute that human illness is not linked to genetically modified organisms. While there are substances that are produced by these, like the herbicides we spray on GE crops, like atrazine, they produce reproductive defects, profound reproductive defects. While that is very apparent,
yes.
I simply do not see how the actual food itself, aside from the pesticides that we already know cause these, are related to the rise in chronic illness that we've seen over the past.
Now, one of the main issues I have with that is that this survey, this research was conducted over, like you've said, about 29 years. Right?
Yes.
So that's a very long and meticulous process. I understand. I understand they must have yielded very important results.
Yes.
Now, what you must understand is that, from my perspective, I grew up in a third world country, right? And but throughout my youth, from the time it took me from the longest period I can remember to the time I actually came to ECU. It occurred to me that throughout this time, there have been very few new appearances of diseases or health-related issues in the environment that I grew up in. However, if you keep up with the news, if you keep up with the information, of course, filtering that information and taking the pieces that are believable and the nonsense that you can craft out from certain images. It comes really apparent that GMOs, mostly in the United States, whose nutritional system is 90%, the food.
90% of our staple crops are GM. Right?
Exactly. I mean, it's become apparent that there have been an increasing amount of health issues. I mean, of course, we cannot take all this entire increase and blame it just on GMOs.
Right.
There have been many different factors.
Yeah, but I mean, but the thing is that like a whole movement has been produced around preventing the expansion and development of GM.
No.
Like, I don't think we should label GM as a culprit. We shouldn't
No.
prevent the future. Like this is, in my opinion, like genetically modified organisms in foods are the future of agriculture. They can solve world hunger. Okay, when applied properly, with, as you said, with proper regulation. Okay, and I don't think that they should be fundamentally like abhorred for and labeled with all these chronic illnesses. Because as you're saying, like we shouldn't jump to that conclusion.
Okay.
Right.
No, I see exactly. I see what you mean. I understand that from my research. Also, I understand that.
Okay, so the whole idea of this project was to like a change in scenery for Project 4 in English 2201. Pretty much, we took up two opposing ideas and brought them together, which were the topics of our article, and had an informative and relatively hectic dialogue. And relatively, it was a good change in scenery. It was definitely a good way for us to actively argue for our stances that we portrayed in each one of our essays that we produced for Project 4. Yeah.
Oh, I guess all in all, it was a really good experience. It allowed us to vocally express both our opinions on the different subject matter. And if we look at it in the global picture, it's true that even though we both presented ourselves as being strongly for and against, it is important to understand that GMOs, no matter which side you take, they do since they have been implemented, they do have a significant importance in our society. And I do think it's really important for us to come together, come to a consensus on what that specific job is.
Yes, and
how it can really be.
We also need, as Babatunde mentioned in the discussion, that there needs to be some level of oversight and regulation, highlighting the anti-GMO and GMF stance of labeling and the initiative to label foods and to have stronger regulation on that. But overall, I do believe our consensus was that we shouldn't abhor GMOs for what they are and outright just reject the idea of modifying agriculture, but we should find a way to make it safely applied into contemporary society through the arguments from both pro and anti-GMO sides brought together to meet some middle ground.
Most likely. So I guess that was basically our study, review, and conclusion on this topic.
Yeah. It's it's reflective of the work that we've both put in onto our essays, hybridized into one 17-minute presentation. So hope you enjoy.
Thank you.